Okay, I guess when Emmanuel is ready, he can join us. About to start. Good, rather, hello, ladies and gentlemen. We're about to start a recorded version of Emerging Managers session, a panel session we are having with Mr. Emmanuel Tarfa, Mrs. Anita Okemine, and Mr. Charles Udekwe. We'll be discussing a very important theme today, the future of work. Welcome, Anita.
Thank you. Welcome. Hi, everybody.
Hi. Charles. Okay. Okay, Emmanuel, Emmanuel Tarfa, I hope to hear from you when you have sound. So, Anita, we are discussing the future of work. And our audience, let me just give us some background. Anita is, let's say, a research fellow, a research fellow with World Bank. Or maybe Anita can give you some perspective, right?
No problem. I can actually introduce myself if you guys want. So I currently work on the private sector development team at the bank, working mostly on HAAF projects, so that's Europe and Central Asia, covering countries like Georgia and Romania. But prior to that, I worked on a DFID program with Nelson, the Enable program, which is focused on enabling business environment reforms. Prior to that, I've also worked at the Clinton Foundation and also at McKinsey. My background is I have a degree in economics and I have a master's in public policy from the Kennedy School of Government. So that's a brief introduction. I should probably say at this point that all my views are my personal views. Not the World Bank views, but they're all my personal views. Anything I'm going to say today.
Definitely. Your disclaimer is well noted. Charles, can you give us a little bit of background, please, if you don't mind? Hello, Charles. Hello, Charles. Oh, hello, Mr. Charles. Anta, can you still hear me? Hello, Anta, can you hear me? Okay, so Charles, I was asking for a brief background from you.
Hi, Nelson.
Yeah. I was asking for a brief background and more like a self-introduction from you. Okay, well, apparently we are finding it difficult to get to Charles. I believe the network is a bit bad where he is, and so we'll have to continue. The future of work, Anita. If I may give a background, this is 2020. We're in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of folks are wondering what's the future going to look like if there is a future, if we survive this. Because it's a huge assumption that we can survive, that we will survive this. Nobody knows for sure what's going to happen. But we're proceeding on the assumption that we're going to survive this, that in the next 20, 25 years, we're still going to be here making positive contributions. So today we are discussing what would that 20, 25 years look like? What are the positions I must take and or we must take to be able to make the most of that 25, 30 years coming? Not just as an individual, but as a business and as a nation. Mr. Tarfa, we are glad to have you. Can you give us a brief introduction and your perspective on this before we even start? Tarfa.
Okay, this is an ambush. I'm not even sat down. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Continue, yes.
Okay, all right. Anita, it's a pleasure to meet you. I walked in hearing your profile. Amazing. I didn't know I was on the same group with the phenomenal superstar like this, professional rock star. Like every blessed corridor you walked with, man. Blessed, by the way, is synonymous for
watching.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, not for digressing. Just liking the place. So if you can hear me loud and clear, my name is Emmanuel Tarfa. I'm currently a management consultant and a partner at the Enzo Kryptonite Company. It's a boutique consulting practice. We're trying to give some of Anita's former employees a run for their money, disrupt the market uniquely. Our focus is currently SMEs, but we're thinking about them differently. So, but prior to that, I worked in CUC Consulting, and I was lucky to start my career at the time of the global economic crisis of 2008. So I was just lucky to work with some of the guys that were leaders from the top four, the global top four management consulting firms. So that's how I picked up my skills. And since then, I've been lucky to work with at least 120 companies in Nigeria, most of which are SMEs, but also a couple of some privileged professionals and bank chiefs and a couple of other people. So essentially, I've been around. I'm currently providing support to one of the ministries in Lagos State. We have an implant there, and we're doing a couple of other things that are coming up. So that's a brief profile about that helps.
Okay. You're welcome, Tarfa. While we're waiting for Charles, I would like to start with Anita. Anita, you have an idea of the background of our discussion this evening, and from your wide range of experience, you've been in the development sector, you've been with World Bank, you are with World Bank, and you've been with the private sector as a consultant with McKinsey. Now, what do you think Africa is going to look like? The world is going to look like in the next 35 years? Let's start from.
So maybe I'll start with the world, and then we can kind of like sieve it out to figure out what it means for Africa. Because I think what Africa would look like would depend on the decisions that we make now. So we've gone through 3 industrial revolutions, right? So you had the first industrial revolution, that was all about steam engines. The second industrial revolution, you had electricity. Then you had mobile technology coming in the third. And then in the fourth industrial revolution, which is where we are at the moment, is all about big data. It's about cloud technology. It's about robotics and automation. So I think the world is in a very new place, and the decisions you make now will kind of influence what happens to Africa in the next couple of years. I'm someone that believes in data, so I'm just going to quote some data from the World Economic Forum's Future of Work report. If you've not seen that report, you should probably read it. I think it comes out every 2 years, right? And one thing that they showed was that 59% of businesses that they interviewed, which was across a broad range of sectors, mentioned that they would change their production process in the next coming years. And I think the end line for them was looking at 2022. And just to give a data point there, right now, about 71% of processes were being done by human beings, but then they predicted that by 2022, only about 58 of those processes will be done by human beings. So that's just one data point. So just in terms of trends, we're seeing a trend towards more automation. Like you take an example of production processes. I recently went to a construction industry forum in Colombia, and the construction industry is known for not automating very quickly, but despite this, there was a lady there that was talking about how they are using robotics now to actually build buildings. So, and they were like, the robots are much more efficient than human beings. There was a factor, but I've forgotten what the factor was. So one trend we're going to see is the move towards automation. The second trend we're going to see is a shift towards where businesses are going to situate their production plants. So in the past, the argument that has been used from Bangladesh to Ethiopia has been the low cost of labor. But then what you're now seeing is that businesses that are interviewed have said the businesses that were interviewed said that they are now going to be basing their decision on production on the level of skill of workers, because you're seeing a switch from you want less skilled workers to more skilled workers. So I think that's the second trend that we're going to see. So there's going to be a shifting dynamic. And what this means is that you might end up seeing a widening rate of inequality, because the countries that are not able to reskill and upskill will be left behind. So I think what will happen with Africa, in summary, I think what will happen in Africa is going to be based on the decisions that we make. If we decide to reskill and skill up very quickly, given that the learning curve for this new industry is actually, everybody is learning at the same time, so you can very quickly leapfrog and catch up. If we're able to do that very quickly, we will be in good shoes. But then if we don't do that, which is the trend that we are moving towards at the moment, then we're going to see huge inequality over the next couple of years. So those are my thoughts in summary.
Okay, fantastic, Anita. If I may summarize, you are saying that based on the World Bank's reports, so World Economic Forum reports, we're going to have a whole lot of automation, we're going to have a whole lot of robotics, a whole lot of artificial intelligence, a whole lot of advances in the quality of machine work. And if we're not careful, if we don't take the right decisions, we'll not be able to catch up. Mr. Charles, we missed you the other time. If you don't mind, can you just give us a little bit of introduction, then you can comment on this subject, please.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. And maybe good afternoon to Anita. I'm sure time zone is probably different over there. I'm Charles. My background is in pharmacy, but over the past few years, I've been reskilling. I now work in corporate strategy at one small conglomerate somewhere here in Africa. We do quite a lot in agriculture, in manufacturing, also in the chemical space, and of course in healthcare. And of course, I'll also couch all my statements with the fact that they are my personal opinions. I don't represent my employer at this meeting. Yeah, I think that's it for now.
Okay, by the way, my name is Nelson Okwonna. I'm your host for today. I'm the CEO of Octavia Development Company, an advisory firm here in Abuja. Mr. Charles, Anita had just given us a picture of what the world is going to look like. And, she was saying that if Africa doesn't scale up quick enough, we're going to be left behind. But before we even get to Africa and how we can address the challenge that the world will pose to us, let's discuss this issue of work. I'm always of the opinion that work is value creation, being able to create value. And you play in that space, you play in the manufacturing distribution space here in Nigeria, working with a very huge group in Africa. What is your experience or perspective to work in Africa? Are we creating value sufficiently? What is the comparative? If you compare the nature of work in Africa with that of the rest of the world, what are your feelings on those?
Interesting. I think I'll say there's quite a lot of room to improve. In terms of the amount of value we add to the abundant raw materials we have in Africa, there's quite a lot that can be done. I'll, however, say that to some extent, differentiating between value creation as work and then maybe, trying to separate this from jobs becomes a bit difficult. However, I think in answer to your question, I'll say there's a lot of room to improve. I think the challenge has typically been that in terms of the kind of manpower we are able to generate, the very best are skimmed off the top to these developed countries, and then we're sort of left with a gap that is perpetually growing and hasn't really been filled. And of course, in terms of technology, I think if the basic amenities have not been provided, so things like stable power supply or even water and things like that, then it's really difficult to imagine Africa taking the lead in other areas of technology. So quite a lot that has to be done in the coming years.
Charles, still on that point, can you just paint a picture, assuming we continue at the same level of progress that we're making at the moment, assuming we continue moving at the same pace, same kind of policy implementation, what do you think Africa will look like in 35 years?
Okay, that's I think that's pretty easy to imagine. However, let me first of all say that across Africa, there's actually a bit of a differentiation taking place. So if you were to look very closely at East Africa, there's a lot going on over there. So I expect that in the coming years, maybe 20 years from now, 30 years from now, East Africa will very likely be the happening place for Africa. I mean, I suspect that. If you come back home, what you will find typically is that a vast majority of the opportunities that should, be occupied by the skilled manpower we have is, well, of course, you have that manpower abandon those positions for greener pastures abroad, which, of course, that has nothing to do with, I mean, you have to allow people to make those kind of choices. But unfortunately, you then have a gap that has not been filled. So I expect that in the coming years, maybe 30 years from now, 20 years from now, we will probably have people in places like East Africa coming in to fill those gaps. Maybe that will cause, some other form of issues we've not even thought about right now. But yes, going along the trends we are currently on, or the trajectories we are currently on, there's quite a bit of concern.
Wow. So, Mr. Emmanuel Tarfa, I would like to ask you the same question. From your own perspective as a management consultant working with MSMEs, assuming Africa or Nigeria now, to be specific, Nigeria, assuming we continue on the same trajectory as we are right now, what do you think the future will look like, Mr. Tarfa?
All right. Firstly, I think you can, before we proceed, can you help me check the video? It says that you have disabled my ability to switch on my video. So maybe I'm not being well behaved, but I promise to be well behaved.
Sorry, you can switch to
reactivate.
Sorry, it's active.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, you can see me, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. So hi again, everyone. Charles, nice to have you here too. So, well, to be frank with you, Nelson, there's no long response. There's no long response. It's going to be very gloomy. And the reason is because we've just been, I think a year or two ago, we've been declared the poverty capital of the world. And I'll tell you our problem. And by the way, I may speak a bit differently. And yes, they're my opinion. They're my opinions, but after serving about 120 SMEs and seeing quite a lot of employees, interviewed several people, it's clear what our problem is. And frankly speaking, looking at the way a company is organized, so a company usually is designed around an opportunity that they want to pursue. So you have a vision, you have a mission, you have values, and so on and so forth. If you looked at Africans that way, our major problem is, we may have visions, we may have missions, or so-called missions. There's a dearth of values. Our values have not helped us. So we have instances of people who really genuinely want to help, and they just want to abort the process. So when you're even saying, okay, you can imagine your EMP program and how hard you're investing in it, and trying to do so much, throwing applications. How many people really sit down and go after this content and say they want to learn? So Africa's problem for me is almost like a child that doesn't want to help herself. And it's a very critical position to take. Nigeria's scenario rather is a case of some people don't want to help themselves. And I'm saying this because of the people I'm dealing with. But why I'm saying that is because for me, the reason why we haven't, taken this why we haven't taken the book by form, of course, there are many reasons, social, political, and so on. But primarily for me is we need to get our values together again. We need to, when you say values, from dignity of work to work ethic, to discipline, to expertise, focus. Not every guy you talk to tells you he's working somewhere and he has a side hustle. All those things, forgive me, for those who are listening, these are all the things that correlate to reduce productivity and inefficiency. And at the end of the day, you can't get a professional or a trusted artisan to get anything done for you. These are all the things that add up and put us where we are. So we have a long way to go. And I want to talk, practically speaking, that if as long as our attitude and our values don't change, we'll be having this conversation in another 25 years. What I don't know is if I'll be here talking to you about it.
Wow. So Tarfa, if I may summarize, what you are saying is that you agree with Charles that in the next 25, 30 years, you might see yourself in Europe, North America.
Well, please don't, you have to edit that part so that people that follow him.
You know, it's not just you, but the category of folks likely. The category of folks who present, you know, highly skilled professionals might just leave. Like
yes, don't forget. Yes, but don't forget. Yes. Yes, sorry? But I emphasize the value problem. We have a value problem.
I was coming to that. Okay. You know, ability of folks eloping, and then we're having folks from East Africa coming to take over and provide that kind of critical skill sets. That the challenge to you is the value system, that we don't have the right value system. Anita, do you agree that it's an issue of value systems? To find the kind of skill sets that we need or to create it. Is it a value system problem, or is it an issue of institutions?
I don't think we can make it one problem. Like, I feel like there are multiple problems that when they integrate together, they form like. But I'm echoing. If you're not talking, maybe we should go on silent because I can hear myself. Okay, sorry.
Continue, please. Continue.
Okay. So I was saying that I don't think that it's one problem. So I agree in that we can't clump Africa into one as a whole. They are very different solutions that are coming out of different places in Africa. If you take East Africa, for example, Kenya is doing a lot in creating innovation hubs, in thinking through innovation. Rwanda is doing a lot in digitization, in the way that their government processes are put in place. Ghana is thinking a lot about all those things also. So I would not say there is one Africa. They are very different solutions. And then if you take the north of Africa, a lot of those countries, Morocco, for example, has gone quite far in thinking about like car production and things, automotives, etc. So I think that there is a split. I also think that, as I mentioned before, unlike if you're going into a profession like medicine, right? That there's a way of doing things because there's been history of different processes of medical procedures, right, that you have to learn if you're a new doctor. It's very different if you're going into like and robotics and machine learning, right? It's new. It's a very new field. So what that means is that everybody is learning at the same time. And the learning is so diverse, and there are like so many factors here. So I feel like if we're able to catch up, and if we're able to invest in it, we will be able to move fast. The learning time is very low. Challenge for me actually is with infrastructure, because you need a situation in which there's broadband access in the countries and there's electricity. So I think those are the two major things that are the major shortfalls in Nigeria and Africa generally. I feel like once you solve those things, the value system, yes, it's bad, but I think it's more an infrastructure problem if you're thinking about how we can move to the next level. So it's infrastructure for me is investment in education and research and development. Those are the two major things I think are the problems.
Thank you very much, Anita. Charles, I'm coming to you and I want to ask a question. From your experience working with an MNC, and I believe you've also worked with some small, medium enterprises, the data shows that 95% of the MSMEs in Nigeria are micro enterprises. And the MSMEs in Nigeria, which are predominantly micro, account for about 76.5% of the employment in Nigeria. And they account for about half of the GDP. Now, this micro, as we well know, may not be able to have access to all these new skill sets we're talking about. machine learning, all that, robotics and all that. How much do you think this new technology will really, affect business and productivity in Africa?
Is this question to me?
Yeah, that's
Charles. It's to Charles.
Okay, yeah. It's a really interesting question. I think one of the things I've come to realize is that as industries mature, you will find that you really can't restrict the kind of players who come into the industry to operate. So let's say if you wanted to look at, say, the automotive industry, if somebody like Ford or even the Teslas of today decided to come into Nigeria, you don't expect them to come and operate based on the constraints you find in the environment. So having said that, I'll just say that I think it may be difficult to imagine what Africa will look like in the area of things like artificial intelligence and let's say Internet of Things and all of that, because it's really quite difficult to see across corners. But I suspect that in a few years' time that these things will be so prevalent that it will be difficult to then look back and see what the world was like without them. I'll give you an instance. Mobile technology, for example, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, was almost impossible to imagine because we didn't have anything like it. And the landlines we had weren't working. So it didn't make any sense to even imagine what mobile technology would look like. Because it was like, okay, if you can't even fix landlines, how would mobile technology work? But today, almost everybody has more than one mobile phone. And, they have a lot of technologies built on top of that. And, of course, internet is quite pervasive. Even though, of course, we're still, living on old technology and there's quite a lot that needs to be done. So in answering your question, Nelson, I'll say, it is difficult to see what exactly the world will look like in Africa, to be precise, in the next 10 years because of the fact that we appear to be so far behind. However, the trend has been that it comes big whenever it comes to Africa. The same way you imagine it would happen in most other parts of the world. So the impact of these technologies will be real. They will be felt. And these are things we need to start to plan ahead towards. We have to actually find ways to be prepared for that future. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you. Tarfa had said it is value systems. Anita says no, it's not value systems, it's more infrastructure, education, and investment. Do you have another point to add to that list?
Sorry, are you talking to me?
No,
okay,
Charles.
Charles. Okay.
Charles,
okay.
Do you have another thing to add to that list? Infrastructure, investment, education.
Yes, I think they're both right. I think it's really quite a lot to do with infrastructure, but also very significantly to do with, and to explain why the value system, aspect of this is really important. You have to understand that within the system, right?
You're siding with Tarfa on the value system.
Yeah, no, I don't think this has to do with siding with anybody. But I just wanted to say this, that even within the system, the situation we're in, the context of the environment we're in, you still find a lot of, not a lot, but a few examples of people who have gone ahead to do great things, even within those constraints. So the infrastructure problem is there, but and look, the value system problem isn't really just with at the grassroots. It's all the way up to the top. So what that means is that part of the infrastructure problem you have is because of the terrible value system you sort of have in some areas of leadership. So if you were to solve the value system problem, I think that the infrastructure problem will become even easier to solve. None of us sitting here believes that power supply, for example, is rocket science in Nigeria. But somehow we've ended up spending billions every year and we still end up with the same results. And it's partly because the value system is wrong. Yeah.
Now, Tarfa, thank you very much, Mr. Charles. Tarfa, I want to get back to you. You've been harping on this value system for a while, long before this session. And I believe you might want to tell us more about it. Is it just value system for the private sector or value system for the private and public? That might be an approach you might want to take to defend your position. However, assuming that is so, and like you rightly said, in the next 35 years, if we do nothing, things will really get bad, and the likes of it might have to elope. What kind of value system should the young man of the future adopt? You know, what kind of value system would help him or her prepare for what is coming? Thank you, Mr. Tarfa.
Okay. All right. Before I proceed, I would like to put a caveat here. I'm a bit of a, don't worry, I'm not a loose cannon, but my style is a bit different. So I've just put out that thing slightly in front. And thank you, Anita, for your point. Now, why I just chose one thing, because I'm studying root cause analysis, right? And I usually learned that I'm paying attention to the fact that sometimes problems are not more than 1, 2, 3, max 3. In fact, God doesn't need one man to start mankind. Things come down to 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. For Africa's problem, Anita, I'll give you 3 examples, and this is not necessarily a defense. So I learned in confidence that one conglomerate wanted to build a railway system for Nigeria. They went to the federal government and one of the ministers, and they told them, hey, we're going to wire the whole country, 35 years, train, blah, blah, blah. Cut the story short, I learned the minister said, if you don't give me $500 million, this isn't going to work. And that never went through. He tells us to talk about the power sector, about $16 billion. So we heard. I don't know how true that is. What's of equipment or whatever was purchased, there's still no power. We just learned now that they're distributing money. I don't know if it's true, but it's rumors. But some of those monies are mishandled. In fact, in my mind, I'm thinking, what kind of prayer should we pray for this kind of people? I mean, what kind of evil is that? That people are donating money and some people are still embezzling that money for relief, for goodness sake. Africa's problem is unbelievable. Like it's I mean, you want to help. You go out to government. I have a friend, today's been her birthday. She said she went to local government office. She wants to give free raw food to schools in Lagos, in that area. And that document is sitting on one civil servant's table. It's not going through. And so in my mind, I'm like, I'm baffled. You know, these things, they hurt me to my soul. And so if it's, I know Nigerians that have come back. There's a particular, last example, I was in the UK last year, and the particular gentleman who was very bullish about Nigeria, you know, engaging us. And then he told me he had a meeting with a very important Nigerian politician, very important. I can't mention names here. He told me in confidence, very important. And he brought investors. And the guy was talking about headsmen and all. He's like, guy, I brought investors for you guys. Let's move forward. This is the deal. We'll fund it. And your guy was talking about Fulani men, headsmen is not true. This is not true. The guy said he was disgusted. And since then, I've not seen him. I saw him in UK and he was looking blue. Like he wasn't even interested in Nigeria. He said, I'm giving up on Nigeria. 2 people have called me on the same issue. So at that point, I came to understand that, you know, we have a few values problem. And why is this value problem is because we're extremely religious. And I'm sorry I'm taking this very divergent view. I will leave you and Charles to deal with the technical issues. I'm sorry, let me just take a different view so that the audience can have a balanced perspective. But we don't have results. So what is the problem? You see us playing World Cup and we're doing prayers on the pitch when our mates that don't know, have any religion or believe in God are practicing with the best technology and they're getting results. So it's a value. The value system there is that we've lost our ability to be pragmatic. I mean, you can imagine the nonsense we're saying prior to this, that, oh, this is not a black man disease, blah, blah, blah. Unscientifically proved. And of course, to our shame, if not just because, I don't even know why, because we're not measuring or we're not testing. Somehow we've escaped it. If not, it would have been a disaster. So my point here is that, and I want to emphasize, is that we need to, and last point on these values, I've been studying America, and I said, why is America great? Why is America great? And, you know, I began to put some things together. Among the several reasons why America is great, this is just one I picked out. The average American is a hero. I repeat myself, the average American is trying to be a hero. In other words, not average, but especially the baby boomers. They, you know, when there's a fire incident, people are going to risk their lives. When they shoot out someone, is covering people. The teacher is, you know, you hear things like that. People trying to stake their lives for what they believe. And we've not gotten to that point in this country. I mean, the only person that is still standing on the streets fighting for bring back our girls is Udekwe. Even me, myself, talking, I'm not on the streets. So it's a case of, we just have this very, I don't know how to describe it. It's a human. So for me, we need to fix that. We need to begin to care for ourselves. We need to begin to pay attention to what is important. so that even when people have reached out to help us, because there are people, a lot of returnees that want to come back and do stuff, but they're always frustrated out of Nigeria. So at that point, I realized that we have a problem with values. So that's that's really what has informed me, because like I said, it's after 120 SMEs, thousands of employees, several meetings with important people. That was my conclusion. And we clearly have a values problem. And values are very important. Values essentially is the character and the container that carries any vision or ambition. You know what I mean? Somebody will stick up and say, take Africa, and Nigeria, I want to help you. And then you tell the guy you need a bribe for him to build rail tracks for you at no cost. No, I mean, it's unacceptable. And it's on and on and on. So that's really my exhortation, as it were, because I went a bit off, to say that we need to resurrect our souls. You know, where it's not fair at all. It's not fair.
Wow, I like that word you used. We need to resurrect our souls. I like that. That's powerful, man. I'm reflecting on that. We need to resurrect our souls. And Tarfa, I believe you are right. I believe you are right, because you need to have human beings standing behind those machines. And if the right value system is not there, regardless of the quality of the machines. But Anita, do you think Kenyans, East Africans are more humane, are more soulish than Nigerians?
So I think, so first of all, I actually wanted to answer your question on the SMEs and the influence it's going to have before I tackle the other question that you have. So on the SME part, it's going to influence even the micro firms, right? So if you take, for example, like the standard economic principles of comparative advantage. So historically, you had comparative advantage because you had land, or we had comparative advantage because we had crude oil. But over time, what is determining comparative advantage is changing. So now in America, for example, wheat production, their productivity is just so much higher because they have technology. So on the same amount of land, what they can produce is 100 times what an African man will be able to produce. So I do feel like just based on that, the cost of production is going to be so much higher for Africans. And if governments don't intend to do import substitution for the next 100 years, they have to realize that even the smallest of firms will be influenced by this. And something else, an example I also wanted to give was, I was recently in, I believe it was Belarus, right? And I met this company, and the company is, I believe, number 3 in putting the films you have on phones in the world. So before any phone is made, to put the screen, they do something, I've forgotten what it's called, but they take out all the air from it before you put the screen. And then we went to their production plant, and it's small. It's actually a very small firm. So I'm not one that believes that a firm must be massive, must be a multinational for it to survive. Like, you can have small firms working efficiently. And what you're even going to find over time is a move towards more specialization. And the smaller firms you are, the more margins you can charge. So for example, instead of making standard furniture like an IKEA, you making like very nice furniture that is more human, that has art in it, which is much smaller scale, is where you'll be able to have the larger profit margin. So that was the first question. On the second one, it's not that I'm saying that values are not important, right? I do believe that values are extremely important. There is a different question of where are your values from. So you say America has values, but what really are those? I live in DC, right? Their values might not necessarily be what we term as values. And a lot of the examples you give, like, corruption, those things happen in a lot of countries that are still functioning quite effectively. They happen, but they happen differently. So here, instead of bribing, it's going to be called lobbying. So it is happening, right? And I do believe that Nigerians are, that's why they say no matter where you drop a Nigerian, in every other country, that is in America, Nigerians perform the best. In England, you see, there was a statistic I saw recently. There are more Nigerians, I've forgotten there are more Nigerian doctors in LA than something. I've forgotten what it was. So we function quite effectively everywhere else. I believe that values are important. It's important to teach your children that working hard leads to results and things like that. But I believe that if you're able to empower the private sector, and if you go to the private sector and you ask them what are the major challenges you're facing, the first one is always electricity. The second one is infrastructure. That's the only thing they say. When you empower the private sector and people are able to find jobs and people are able to get money through those jobs, they are then able to hold their government accountable, and then you see those value systems coming into place. So I think that the first step for me is how do we ensure that the private sector functions? I think the private sector, I told you, my major problem in Nigeria is infrastructure. That is what they tell you. They're like, every other thing we can walk around, just give us infrastructure and tell the government to just stay where they are, and we'll be able to survive. So infrastructure is always the first thing. So that's why for me, the priority is, I'm trying to take a very pragmatic approach towards this. It's like, what do we need to solve? And how do we solve it? Once you solve the infrastructure problem, you're then able to empower the private sector. You're able to engage in the fourth industrial revolution, and that kind of solve all the issues that we have. So those are my thoughts.
Wow, thank you very much, Anita. What you are saying in essence, if I understand correctly, is that yes, we will have some value issues that are questionable, and those our colleagues in East Africa do not necessarily have better values than us. They just happen to have better infrastructure. And I'm sure Tarfa or anyone else could argue that the reason why they have better infrastructure is that those in leadership have better value system. Now, this issue of value systems in leadership, because we agree that Nigerians are not innately bad. Nigerians are not innately terrible people because we do well everywhere else. But somehow, we've found ourselves with the wrong, in quotes, set of leaders who happen not to have been able to provide us with this basic infrastructure, education, and skills. I would like to ask any of us who would like to answer that question. What do you think is the best approach to bring in that kind of thinking and governance that will give birth to the kind of infrastructure, education, and skill acquisition programs that we need? Maybe I should give that to Charles.
Interesting. So if I get you well, I guess the question will be, how do we inject the right kind of value system into our leaders? And probably that would be for the next crop or the next generation, because I don't know if it's possible to do it at this stage. I guess maybe that will start with, okay, I'm noticing everybody laughing. Let me take that back then. I'll just say that it's very important to think of how important the educational sector is. And so, you know, and that sort of brings a straight line between, you know, our conversation and the future of work. Education is critical. And education has to be two-pronged. On the one hand, you know, you have to, actually, let me call it three-pronged. Because one of the things which the World Economic Forum was able to note in their Future of Work report is that there will be two sets of skills that people will need for the future of work. On the one hand is the tech skills, you know, things like coding, etc. And then on the other hand, you have softer skills like creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, you know, analytical thinking, and active listening. Those kind of skills would be really important. But I think the third set of skills maybe would be, you know, these value systems that we're talking about that help people to then, you know, position themselves properly and utilize the other sets of skills we mentioned earlier for the best, of mankind and our colleagues. So our educational system really needs to be revamped, and these three buckets of skills or of tools will need to be included in whatever curriculum we are able to put together. So we need to equip our students to be able to function in a highly, a technology field environment. You need these people to build those soft skills that are needed, but very important, you need to also ensure that they are equipped in the right value system so that when they get into governance roles, they're able to execute the very best. Yeah.
Well, Charles, you have some issues with your microphone, but I believe the summary of what you said is that we need to build folks with the right kind of skills and value systems at the same time. That the educational system must come to the rescue of raising folks with a skill set for the future, analytical skill set, technological skill set, communication skill set, analytical, observational skill set, communicational skill set. But in addition to that, they must be equipped with the right hat. Well, if you're just joining us, this is an Emerging Managers program brought to you by Heart and Arts Foundation. Heart and Arts Foundation exists to raise men and women with the right attitudes and skills in the marketplace. And we are so glad that it appears this conversation is, moving towards that trajectory, that we need to raise folks with the hearts. And Tarfa had earlier said that because of the wrong value system in the private sector and the public sector, that is the major reason why Nigeria in particular has not made progress. Tarfa, I bring that question to you. How do we raise folks? How do we create an educational system that raise men and women with the right hearts and skill sets?
Okay. Firstly, I apologize if I influence the direction of this conversation with my first point. The agenda was
you did it. No, you did it wrong.
Okay, no problem. I just wanted to take my own style is I like to just take a perspective that is a niche perspective, so that especially when I'm among gurus like my co-panelists. All right, but the thing is this. So let me tell you what I learned from this social distancing thing, and it's teaching me something that I'm also learning. You see, this whole pandemic, as terrible as it is, as phenomenal as it is, this concept of social distancing is really what is saving the world from a total collapse, where, almost everybody will be sick and all that. And at the same time, it is the same reason why the economy is going to collapse. So, as simple as it sounds, social distancing, it is the lifeline we have to save ourselves from this disaster. You know what that is teaching me? It's teaching me that if we in Africa begin to look for this, in bracket, social distancing type solutions, they're very simple. Trust me, we could be on our way out of this mess. I repeat myself, if we begin to look for our own type, and I don't mean literally social distancing, I mean solutions that look as simple as that. Wash your hands, stay away from people. So let me bring it home. How do we fix this so-called value system that I've been talking about for a while? I'll take a very, very aggressive approach. I was at Nigeria's Economic Summit Group meeting 2 years ago, and a lot of them were talking interesting things, private, public sector, interesting technocratic stuff or technocrat type stuff. So I stood up and I told them that, you see, at the core of Nigeria, the real problem, okay, sorry, this is going to be aggressive, but one of the, where the power lies, when you want to get stuff done, so they were complaining that Nigeria, for instance, the population is going to explode. And that also keeps me up at night. When I went to one of my state tours across Nigeria on the rice, over 8 states exploring rice, the taxi man that took me around told me he had nine kids. I almost fell off my chair. 9 children, and the guy is barely trying to survive. The gentleman that died on the vice president's convoy has almost like 14 or one outrageous number. It's one of those guys that motorcade, right? No motorcade. So we have a clear problem of population explosion in the midst of poverty. But back to my point. So they're asking how can they get people to, So I told them that the secret lies at the base. And what is that base? The base is religion. Now I'm saying, why am I talking like this? Why am I bringing religion? And I'll tell you, it's my opinion. And I'll tell you how. The only place that Nigerians do not mess with is with their religion. So if you can go to that base, that point, that source, and establish the so-called, put in inverted commas, social distancing concept there, where you sit down and you get those guys to help you tell the people to begin to fix the value system or begin to address certain things, then I think we may get ahead. So we say, well, no, that's too long, that's not realistic, that's too sensitive. Well, I don't know how you want to look at it, frankly speaking, but we've gone around this circle, we've been on this mountain for too long, and I don't think we're going to move forward until we address that central problem. What am I saying? The only people that Nigerians will listen to are the people they put in front of them. Well, that's one group. Another group maybe are the celebrities. I'm talking about people that have real influence, that can chat across. You know, sometimes we sit down and have these very nice conversations on social media and we post them. Do we really go back and sit down? How many Nigerians are really listening to us? A lot of people are just distracted and they're just doing their own thing. Meanwhile, the most important thing, they're not paying attention to. Let me tell you why this is frustrating and why I keep hammering it. To get a driver in Lagos now, it's hell. I'm not kidding you. To get a driver in Lagos now is crazy. I went to Okwonna to inspect a 1,000-acre farm, and I asked the guy, he's doing one fantastic. They were the people that started and founded this whole crowdfunding thing. Even before the big boys, even before the current people doing it now became, pretty big in it or established. He said that. So I asked him, so come, tell me, 1,000 acres, what's your biggest problem? People sending money from Lagos to farm for them and pay some returns. I know the guy told me. I was shocked. He said, my biggest problem is not finance or capital or government policy. My biggest problem is people. I'm importing people from Togo to come and farm, Ogbomoso. When I heard it, I decided to stop giving money to beggars. So why am I, the word is not attacking, but why am I emphasizing religion? Because religion has made Nigerians complacent, has made Nigerians passive. Nigerians don't ask their politicians questions. You don't sit down and study the budget because everything you've been told, everything will be well, everything will be all right. But that's not the case. It has not been all right since 1980. It's still the same problem. So how do we need to sit down and have frank conversations with the influencers. They're called influencers. Sorry,
continue. Continue, Tarfa.
Value systems are usually, the tone of values are usually set by influencers. I'm telling you my own social distancing concept or idea to solve this problem. Yeah. So who are the influencers? Nigeria currently has 3 groups of influencers. Number 1, religious leaders. Number 2 is these guys, the celebrities. I think they're very influential. The average young guy out now in the slum wants to be like the video or this. That's really it. The 3rd group will maybe be family or relatives or whatever, depending on how close they are. But those are losing the grip of it because, we're all running the rat race, wake up in the morning, so parents don't even see their kids. So it comes down to those 2 parties, the religious folks and the so-called media and entertainment folks. That, for me, is where the influence lies. So we need to start, and that's why I'm taking the pragmatic approach to break it through circles, to begin to influence their conversations towards that. There are people religious leaders that will tell their members to jump off a cliff, and they will do that. So imagine if you told those people now, please, can you hear me tell your people to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things? Maybe we'll see better results. House help, driver, farmers, impossible to hire or find. And then you're now wondering, but they're shouting there are no jobs. When the jobs are in front of them, we can't even hire people to get the job done for. Even as I'm talking to you now, I have like a couple of roles that I'm supposed to fill. And I'm scratching my head trying to fill those roles. Of course, there are different reasons why that is, and it's not a Nigerian problem, it's a global problem, find the right fit. Again, but we even have a case where our own is even below par, where even when you now find someone who may be skilled, attitude is off, it's out of the door. You can imagine that we've changed almost 7, 8 house helps in the last barely 2 years. And it's not, I don't think we're terrible people. So we have a values crisis. So I think we attack it from, go to the users base, go talk to, they're the ones that gather all the people, day in, day out, Fridays and Sundays. Let them begin to address their people. I think that's where we need to shape the minds of people to be pragmatic, to be hardworking, to be diligent. There's something called work ethic. You tell your employer 9 o'clock and you honor it. Simple rules of engagement. And yes, Anita, I thank you. You highlighted American values. See, I understand what you mean broad-based. But I've also worked with Americans. If an American tells you I'll be show up at 8 o'clock, they show up at 8 o'clock. The basic things. For Nigeria, no, the guy will come and tell you he's going for a night vigil, so he's not going to show up at the time. You're wondering, I don't understand. Doesn't your God respect diligence? These are the things you hear in the office. Someone will tell you, no, I'm sorry, I can't come for the meeting because I'm going for... meanwhile, he's not delivering, he's not productive. That's the country we live in. And then you'll be playing praise and worship songs in the office, disturbing your life. I'm showing very pragmatic things, but this is the reality that we're dealing with. It's a crazy world. And that's what I deal with every day. When there's an employee, do you know that on my clients, these are established, respected people. I have 2 cases of 2 call me and we're crying. This woman is in her 50s. She said, Emmanuel, they want to kill me. My staff want to kill me. She was crying on the phone. I'm not kidding you. That's what I deal with every day. So I'm seeing It's crazy. And so Charles, for instance, I'm sorry, Charles, I'm just calling you probably work in a conglomerate. There are better behaved people there because, I mean, at a certain level, it's supposed to pay you well. But when you're dealing with SMEs and you're seeing all kinds of stuff, you'll be like, whoa, how did we get here for goodness sake? How did we get here? So, Nelson, my approach may be very funny, but check the battle to where the influencers are and let the influencers deal with it. That's my own solution.
Wow, Tarfa has kind of hit on something that I think is quite important, the issue of culture. If I understand correctly, what you are saying essentially is that the culture is what influences the value system, and if you can work with those that influence culture, it can ultimately influence the value system. Well, I think I agree with you on that, there's a place for influencing culture. Anita, you're smiling. What do you have to add to that, please?
Well, you actually censored it by saying culture. I went to the heart. I said religion. I didn't say culture. Okay. You're the one that so I said religion. I didn't say culture. No apologies.
I have slightly different views about this. Like, so first of all, just in terms of the question on how do we influence or change the political system, I believe Charles said, oh, we need the young generation to come in. But I think the younger generation is actually worse than the older generation. Because the older generation, they were born into a time where hard work actually had results, right? So they were born into, oh, you actually had to fight. A lot of them saw the Civil War. So because of that, they are more value and not merit-based than our generation. I feel like our generation, in some cases, in a lot of cases, have seen situations in which you're rewarded not based on hard work or merit. So they expect that to happen if they go into government. So I'm actually much more afraid of our generation going in and what will happen with that generation. So if you think historically about the movements that have created change, right? They have been very, very radical movements. And a lot of it has stemmed from financial empowerment. And that's why I keep going back to the need for us to financially empower people. I don't know that many cases where you've actually changed a value system by doing like behavioral change management. And for me, people think that behavioral change has its place, but I feel like if you want such a radical shift, you want a situation in which people make money, they realize that, okay, me as the employer, I realize that, I can't keep you if you're not going to make money for me. And me as the worker, I also realize that I need this money and it's good money. A lot of us, like I was having a discussion very recently with a friend of mine, right, about employment. We complain about a lot about our staff. So your staff doesn't arrive on time, your staff doesn't do X. But what are you also doing for your staff is the question I ask. Have you trained your staff? There are some law firms that keep their staff until 2 a.m. in the morning. So if I don't arrive at 8 a.m. in the morning, it's because that you kept me until 2 a.m. the morning before. Those type of behaviors will also not be done here. So you are treated in a particular way, and for that reason, you put in the desired amount of work. So I feel like we should also realize that a lot of staff in Nigeria go out of their way to do certain things for certain businesses that they would not do here. Yeah, I require my break time. I require my time after work. I require time to take care of my family, and we don't do those things in Nigeria. So I think we should just be aware of that also. So I strongly believe in empowering people economically, and that will change. I am somewhat against putting too much on religion in the workplace, because if you look at the countries that have done well, with the exception of Singapore, I think, most of the countries that have actually done well economically are not the religious countries. You need to be able to separate religion from the workplace. You need to be able to separate religion from politics, because that's when you have all the issues we're having in Nigeria around tribalism, around religion determining who you put in a particular role, and it's not being merit-based. So I would separate those. I would focus on economically empowering people. I think when you economically empower people, naturally the values start coming into place. This is my personal belief, and I think it's been proven over time. So those are my own thoughts. I'm not saying religion. Religion has its place, and I believe I'm a Christian. I strongly believe in religion, but I'm not sure the place where it is in the workplace or in politics or in trying to change those value systems from that perspective.
Fantastic, fantastic. Now, I would like to hear Charles on this. Tarfa has really hammered on religion. Me, I think is a cultural issue. Anita says, forget it, just stick with incentives. Let the market incentives incentivize good behavior. I think it's a DC effect. You know, it has to do with this. But Charles, what do you think? Before I give my own thoughts too.
I think you guys have summed it up. By the time you deal with the culture issues, which of course probably arise from some aspect of the, I don't know, I don't really think the religion issue is so much of a problem. I think if you couch religion within the right kind of culture, you can get the best, of all worlds. And then, just like Anita has also very aptly stated, the incentive system also has to be very properly skewed. Otherwise, if you're expecting everything from your employees and you're not really giving them enough to actually motivate them, then it becomes a bit of a challenge. Yeah, I think you guys have actually summed it up very well.
Okay, for the sake of our listeners, this again is an Emerging Managers program. We're discussing the future of work. We had earlier highlighted some of the factors that will change the workplace, emerging technologies, mainly that emerging technologies and change in demographics and change even in the way work is organized. However, we said for Africa, particularly in Nigeria, we're going to have a lot of challenges if we don't change the status quo because of lack of infrastructure, lack of proper incentives for businesses, and brain drain being on the rise. So we might actually have a very tough situation in the next 25 to 30 years. I'll be asking ourselves, how best do we prepare for this? And the two dominant thoughts here is that we must have a value system reform approach. That value system reform can come in the place of the role of religious institutions and other influencers of culture could be stepped up to influence their role in the workplace and, ensure that the right incentives, are provided, of course, with the right infrastructure, macroeconomic policies, and all that. And even here at Heart and Heart Foundation, that are some of the beliefs we've always espoused, that you should have both heart and art, not either. Both are very, 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 very important. Now let's go back a little bit to of the highlighted points I would like us to discuss today, and that is, how do I, as a business person, as a worker, as an academic, or as a government, respond, to this new emerging future? But before we get to that, Tarfa, I think you have something to say. I'll give you 2 minutes to say that before we move to this next point.
Two minutes is even too much. I wanted to clarify something. Sorry, and it's not a debate or defensive move on my part. I didn't say religion is the solution. I said religion is even the problem. That's what I'm saying. I said religion is the problem. Nigerians, so I said, how do you solve the problem? Well, I mean, it's the problem. That's what I've always said. But more importantly, the question was, how do you change this culture? I said you should go to the place, the only place where Nigerians will listen. I mean, do you understand? That's what I'm saying. And it's a very radical opinion. But I said it after much observation and study. And I looked at where else would the Nigerian be obedient and do things as they ought to do. Especially in a country where nobody goes penalized for anything you do wrong, most times. Go back to their source. So I said, let's take the conversations there, because that's the only place. Now, it's a very touchy and a very unusual, conversation to have. But I said it after much observation. And of course, that's how I arrived at that decision. So
can I just ask one question here? Think about all the things your religious leaders have told you to do. So let's even start from the most basic one. Do not fornicate. How many people actually adhere to this rule? We go to church and we listen, but we do not adhere to it because there is no repercussion in life at the moment. The repercussions come after death, right? So I feel like there's a limit. Even if we think that people listen to the religious leaders, they just listen. I don't think they necessarily do what they say. And I think
so when we go there, we're not going to talk about fornication. We're going to talk about jobs, being diligent in the workplace, which are two different things. Fornication has its own force, which I'm sure is beyond even mankind.
Not cheat,
but where
not lie.
No, hold on. Where I'm going is this. And you know one thing, I think and I'll say this respectfully, I think I'm ahead of my time, or with all sense of humility, sorry. I'm ahead of my time on this subject. When you guys meet me in front, when we get in front, you find out that this is what, and I'm like I said, I respectfully speak, Anita, you are sitting in the US. I mean, you flick a button, the bus arrives in 2 minutes. Things work as they are supposed to. Yeah, I'm telling you, somebody will show up late and tell you went for a picture. Do you understand what I'm talking about? But let's even leave that. Let's not go there. I mean, that is not even the perfect example. My point is,
okay, so
I'm just saying.
Let me just interrupt.
But that's not even
interrupt a little and say that.
Okay. But I don't really want to take conversation that way.
I was just going to say.
What I just said was okay. Go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say that you are right. Religion does form a bit of a puzzle, but I think Anita is also right, and I think the point I take away from what you've been saying is that religion also provides an opportunity. So if religion is a bit of a problem because you feel that these people who are in those positions to influence have not necessarily been utilizing that opportunity very well, then maybe there's an opportunity for the private sector or for someone else to start to utilize this channel properly, get people to speak about issues like this. Because like we've said multiple times in this conversation, there's a problem with the value system, there's a problem with the culture. And just like Nelson rightly stated, if you want to change culture, then you need a position of influence. So religion does provide that opportunity. And maybe that's really what I take away very strongly from this, that we need to see that opportunity for what it is and start to exploit it. Especially here in Africa, we have quite a big opportunity.
Sorry, can I just one additional thing? So using Singapore as an example, right? So they're very Christian. I wasn't actually aware of that, but Singapore is actually very Christian. And as you probably know, the Bible has certain rules against gambling. But when the government wanted a situation in which the country was known as a hub for things like gambling, so the type of tourists that would want to come in to gamble, they did not say, oh, based on our religion, we know that our people are not going to gamble. Instead, they put in fines for Singaporeans so that if you gamble as a Singaporean, you have to put in, I believe, $500. You have to pay $500 first before you can gamble as a Singaporean. So I think the same thing applies. Like, I feel like religion sets a set of rules, and a lot of the time, as Christians, because there's no immediate repercussion, I don't feel like we necessarily adhere to those rules. Because if that was the case, you go to church every day and our politicians here do not steal, do not lie, do not cheat. But every single day they come up and they do those things. So I feel like religion can definitely say it more. But in terms of actually influencing, I'm not really sure how much influence it's going to have on the ordinary man. I think you actually need to put carrots and sticks to ensure that people are behaving in a particular way. So just wanted to also say that.
So I think maybe maybe not getting my own side. What I'm saying, I'm not to be defensive again. I didn't want to use this example, but I'm from the north. let's leave the Christian side. The reason why the girl child does not want to get educated and is marrying at an early age, I don't want to go into details because this broadcast may go far. You know the reason. So I'm saying that look at that problem. You know, the Marjorie system, which Sanusi himself has adamantly fought. What is at the heart of it? It's religion. And that's why almost 8 million kids are out of school. So all I'm saying is we need to take the battle cleverly to the place of influence so that we can get stuff done. So if you want to reduce the number of you want to put in like family, what's that thing called? Family planning, so that Nigeria's population, you can't take that conversation on the economics. They will shoot you down or any of those things. You have to take it to the users, get them to understand and find ways for them to change the narrative, to talk to their leaders. I'm saying that we happen to be in an unfortunate system where religion is our driver. In our parents' time, it was our fundamental culture. You can bet whether it's Igbo culture, Hausa, Yoruba. Our forefathers' cultures was the influence of values. But now it has shifted to religion, both Islam and Christian. So that is where now the battle is. So I'm saying that if you want to see seismic shifts in value system, take that battle there, have those conversations with those influencers on your behalf, and they will move the needle for you. That's all I've been saying. And that's how I came to that conclusion. And that's my theory, that if you move the battle there, they can have, I'm not saying we should go Singaporean, join church and state. No, not at all. All I'm saying is Nigerians now, the only thing, I mean, we pay 10% of our income without negotiating it, but we don't pay taxes. These are all the issues we need to be able to look at. And so my point is, where can you get people to be influenced? Like say you want to beat a child and you look for the auntie or the uncle that the child fears the most. And you say, I'll report you to so and so. Then the child now says, oh, okay, I'll take you seriously. That's what I'm talking about. Don't forget that people volunteer in religious connections. They do workers' jobs from morning to 3 p.m. Nobody's paying them salary. Except they're still nothing, but nobody's paying them salary. And they're doing that free of charge just to impress a cult leader in quotes. Think about it. So the cult leader now says, okay, this is what I require you to do now. I've spoken to these government officials and they're saying, let's move forward this way. Trust me, it will work. It will work. That's all I'm saying. That's the summary of my debate on this Nigerian issue. I rest my case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tarfa. And if you permit me, panelists, to say that yes, both sides have a big point. The value system is very important, and the value system is influenced primarily by the culture of a geography. Culture is a set of shared beliefs, and what we have in Nigeria, has a lot to do with the shared beliefs. But it is not just the shared beliefs. There's also the place of the incentive structure, the provision of the right infrastructure, and all that. However, it takes the right kind of culture to do that. And we've asked that question, how do we create that kind of culture among our leadership? And Tarfa is saying that we have to go back to the religious institutions, the celebrities, and even, in my own opinion, the academic institution that creates the culture in the first place. And I don't think it's a wrong recommendation. It's sensible, it makes a lot of sense, but of course it has to be balanced with what Anita is saying. However, the challenge is who will do this job? Who will take this responsibility of creating this kind of change? So it appears to me that this is a leadership issue. This is a public leadership issue. And apparently the current influencers, in quotes, have not provided that leadership. So Anita, I'm going to ask you, where can this leadership be found from? And what are the recommendations on how this leadership can emerge? For the young person who is listening to us now is wondering, oh, is it a hopeless state? Should I just go and start looking for my visa, my green card? Thank you.
I think it's a very difficult question because so we have a two-party system, right? And a lot of the potential for you to get into government is highly dependent on godfatherism and if you have a godfather or not. Yeah. So we need a radical movement that kind of eliminates all the people that are now in government and puts in a new set of people. But for that to happen, you need a huge amount of financing. So in terms of where it will come from, I think that it has to be a new set of people, a mix of technocrats and people from the grassroots that really understand the challenges at the grassroots level. And then in terms of how that can be done, I think you might need to mobilize funding from the diaspora, because there's a huge diaspora base that has a lot of money and can probably, if there is a mission that they can work towards, that would make sense. And also like crowdsourcing from the general public. But I think it needs to be a system that kind of eliminates both PDP and APC and is a completely new thing. I think that's the only way that we can create the kind of change that we want to see. If not, you're not going to get that change. Yeah.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, saying that go create your own party or form a group of young people and have you're right, how to write a party manifesto and just get this job done. So Mr. Charles, do you agree with her? And if you do, how is that to make this happen? Thank you.
Yeah, tough one though. Yeah, I feel tempted to say, look, I don't have the answers here. But I'll say, just like she's rightly said, you know, you will need a new set of ideas. You need a new set of propagators of those ideas. I think that's beginning to happen. I think a couple of people are beginning to emerge on the scene who have those ideals at heart. And, I think we need to start to galvanize efforts, you know, to make this happen, but not necessarily at the very top. I think we tend to expect that this change will happen somewhere, you know, from the very top and trickle down. But I think it will be more effective happening from the ground up. So it's very likely that, you know, we will start to see more effective civil society groups, you know, arise in Africa, in Nigeria. We will start to see NGOs, you know, blaze the trail. Coming back to the, you know, religion issue, we'll start to see religious organizations take responsibilities, you know, for the society, the communities they serve, you know, and then gradually all of this will help us to then breed the kind of leaders we need to enter into political office. I think that's really going to be the way it will happen. Just remind us that, you know, to an extent, what we see across Africa in the quality of leaders we have is really just the result of the quality of followers we have. So as soon as we are able to improve the followership, then we will see better leaders emerge, or at least more suitable leaders emerge. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. We'll be running up in the next couple of minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Charles, for that. I'll try to summarize what we've said so far. We've said that the future of work globally in the next 25 to 30 years is going to be highly technology driven. It will rely a lot on, you know, some new changes like artificial intelligence, like, you know, 3D printing, Internet of Things, machine learning, nanotechnology, biotechnology. You know, it's going to be a completely new world. And if Africa doesn't, you know, wake up, if Nigeria in particular doesn't wake up and begin to get certain things right, we're in trouble. So that kind of shifted this conversation towards how do we really get the political scenario right? Well, I've allowed us to make that pivot, leaving the primary discussion, because truly the future of Africa is bleak if we don't make the right changes. And we'll kind of begin to agree that a new kind of leadership must emerge, a new kind of leadership that champions a new kind of value system that is willing to make the sacrifice to make that happen. Now, I'm going to round up by asking each of our panelists to tell us in their own personal capacity how they are hoping or dreaming, you know, envisioning in their own personal capacity to make this their own contributions towards achieving this leadership challenge, because we can't just afford to be analysts and comment on this and walk away. I believe by just being here, we kind of have a sense of responsibility to do something about that. I'll start with you, Mr. Tarfa. What are you going to do to address this issue?
All right, so I'm going to tell you, but first of all, unfortunately today, I didn't come prepared. The word is not prepared. I didn't come to demonstrate my functional expertise and all the stuff I do to help people get employable and all of that stuff. I just want to deal with the roots, what I call the roots. But so I'm studying. This is very strange. I'm studying cult leaders, right? And I'm seeing how they're able to exert influence on their members and get people to run into a ditch. What is the psychology? Because they're not using any diabolical, trust me. I think it's just psychological. How do I begin to, for the sake of someone's good, begin to influence the way they think? So one of the people I've spent expensive time studying is Hitler. I mean, before you started this call, I was watching maybe my 10th documentary or something on the subject. So I've studied it carefully and I'm paying attention to how these guys rose from absolute obscurity to almost take over Western Europe. And frankly speaking, paying attention as ruthless as he was, as terrible as all the things he did, which I know I condemn, he was just standing, as far as I'm concerned, the foundation was very shaky. His men around him were very evil and they were fighting themselves, trying to impress him, disloyal and all that. And then, he also was not really, he didn't have the act together. So when he hit Britain resisted very strongly. So at that point, he knew his limitations. But the other countries, of course, so it was fear, so what are the other alternatives to fear and terror to influence people to do what you have to do? I think it's a new vision for me. So let me tell you some of the things I'm doing. What I want to be able to do now is to bring enlightenment to people. So you can imagine some of us, the reason why we're exposed because we grew up watching all the great stuff, good programs, cartoons, Coming to America, all these things that just open our minds. How will it be if somebody would translate these things and bring it home to the ordinary man? Because I want to take now I've come again. I want to take the grip of people's minds away from these things so that they take ownership of it. So when somebody wakes up and somebody tells you to to wrap yourself in a suit, in a bomb suit and go blow up yourself, you'll be able to ask questions and say, what about you? Why can't you do that? You're able to ask such critical questions. So I think that is the one I want to influence, where people will independently, ask questions. And that's why I respect the people from the Southeast. They say they don't have any king. And you can see how progressive they have been, except for the challenge they've had, even though sometimes they say comes with disloyalty. But for me, they're the most economically active segment, as it were. I'm sorry, economically active and probably the richest. It's the case of asking critical questions. So I want to be able to come up with programs, and I just gave an example of one. Translate these. I want to be able to take a Dubai documentary on Discovery Channel and convert it to Hausa language and send it to the north and spread it through social media. Let them watch. I'm like, whoa, these guys are Muslims like us, but they are not living in abject poverty. They have oil, we have oil. So that for me will begin the silent revolution. That's what I want to put out there, because don't forget that these propagandas, all these religious political, fights that start and all the rumors and all of that, the fake news, it's all still built on some ideology. So why don't I form positive ideologies and infiltrate the system? And what has made you and I exposed is because we can watch Netflix, we can ask questions, we're educated. And education is not 1 + 1 or 2 +. Education is what I just said now. Somebody tells you to go blow up yourself in a building, and you say, what about you? Why don't you send your own child to blow up the building? Someone says, go and beg on the streets. Where are your own children? Why are they not begging on the streets? That, I think, is the beginning of my own approach. Radical. And I want to do it in all the languages. And to show that we actually did one example. One of these gentlemen, and that's my last point. His name is Les Brown. And some of you know him. Motivational speaker. Some of the guys we listened to growing up that challenged us to ask questions. Even though some of these motivational speakers, we have to take them with caution. I'm sure you see some of the jokes on social media. But the point is, I translated Les Brown to Yoruba and Pidgin language, to Pidgin English. And you know, I've not circulated it yet, but I mean, I worked with a team rather. It was a team of us that were pursuing it. I want to put it out there so that people who watch, I'm like, wow, so I can dream big, I can be inspired, you know, and so on and so forth. So I think that for me is to infiltrate the system with an ideology that is counter and superior to the one that has put the masses backward, because it's the masses that vote, and it's the masses that sell their vote. And you and I, you know, we can go around saying we want to vote for all the smart technocrats, but the masses at the end of the day call the shots. So I think that is for my own strategy. Like I said, study these guys that have done terrible things and see how I can convert it for good by positively manipulating people for the good of the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tarfa. I think that's awesome. Personal leadership, public leadership, inspiration, and creating sufficient momentum out there. Anita, DC.
Sure. So thanks for that, actually, Tarfa. I've learned, I think I'm going to steal the whole idea of going to study the cult leaders.
You can start with Hitler. You can start with Hitler. I'll send you some recommendations on Netflix.
I'll start with Hitler first.
Seriously.
And then...
I'll send you some recommendations on Netflix. Amazing, man. When I watched it, I didn't believe it.
I do feel like just the ability to influence people is a very powerful tool. Not everybody has it. So it'd be good to learn what these people did, even if you don't want to live in the same way they did. So for me, I probably have a three-pronged approach. So the first one is learning. I spent 7 years in Nigeria working on, six years in Nigeria working on the policy space. So for example, I initially worked on a team migration. When I was there, we moved the needle from about 50% coverage rate to above 90%. And I would say like my team worked really hard on it, and I was very delighted with that. But over time, I felt like I became my mindset was, I don't know the right word to use, but I feel like there's a lot going on in the world now, and I need to learn that to be able to take it back to Nigeria. So for example, as I said, I went to Belarus, I was able to see, oh my God, this is what is happening with technology. They have this new glass that you don't have to clean at all, it self-cleans itself. So I want to be able to take all those lessons and take them back. So for me, the next year or 2 years is going to be about learning. But at the same time, I'm seeing how I can, from here, influence policy. So I've been involved in, for example, the private sector diagnostics for Nigeria, which is a tool that the World Bank will be using to influence decisions in the private sector space. So I'm trying to ensure that I'm also still engaged in the policy space. So for me, that's the first thing. So learning to take it back, then policy. And then finally, I do have interest in politics, because I think ultimately the civil society can do X, the development world can do Y, and they all have a role to play. But if you want to have lasting change and truly change like the system, you need to be in politics in some way. Like, it doesn't have to be governor or president. It can be you at the local government level, just influencing your local government. So I really would strongly advise every single person that has the right motive for Nigeria to, at some point, think about going into actually influencing the political space, even if it's just to be no, I shouldn't say just, because I think local government chairmen have a lot of power, even if it's starting at the local government chairman level or even below that, and influencing your small space first. I think by influencing one person, you can then ultimately influence more people. Yes, that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anita. Very soon, I expect to perhaps the governorship candidates in the Trust State. Okay, Charles, let's hear from you. We're rounding up now.
Yeah, I mean, brilliant ideas from you guys, and I'm sure there's quite a lot we can all learn from this. I've been mulling an idea a couple of months now, maybe about a year. And basically, it revolves around trying to get young graduates to try their hands at new things. So basically, this is how it will operate when it goes live. It'll basically be trying to implement cooperatives around young graduates, enabling them through some sort of tech tool. Of course, I'm thinking around, how this will exactly work. I've penned down a few thoughts privately, but the idea is simply this, how do you ensure that young graduates who come out of school are, first of all, inspired? Now, how did this whole thing come to be? I was listening to a talk that the chairman of BAIN, she's a lady, Otish Gadiesh, she was talking during a World Economic Forum seminar, and she was talking about the future of education, and she talked about how that the Ivy League schools do just one thing. I mean, and they do it very well. In addition to the fact that they have the very best faculty and, of course, have very good infrastructure, they empower their students. And then she explained empowerment as that ability to think that you can actually do anything. And, when I thought about this, I started to wonder, why is it that the average, best graduating student from a typical Nigerian university is not able to do as well? And it's really because the average Nigerian student isn't empowered. So you may be the very best from school, you may have studied a lot, you may have come up with, you may also have very good ideas, but somehow you just don't believe within yourself that you can actually achieve much. And one way to achieve this is to get these guys together, whoever they are, students who have come out, and feel that they want to make a mark, and then provide some sort of tech space that enables them to exchange ideas, find a way to coalesce these ideas or crystallize these ideas into goals, and then, start to funnel resources to them. Nelson was involved in a hackathon project recently to develop a CPAP, that's a continuous positive air pressure device. And it's amazing how much they were able to achieve within such short time. Imagine if you had 100 of these kind of groups, 1,000 of them. Now, even if you funded 1,000 of them and only 3 succeeded, there's a chance that those 3 could provide, 100 times the return on all you had put into the 1,000 groups. And it's also not just about how much you can achieve financially, it's the fact that then you can start to inspire young Nigerian graduates to go out and do great things. So these are some of the things I've been thinking about. I think over time you'll get to hear more from about this, but that's really going to be one of the ways to influence, the future of work in Nigeria.
Wow. Thank you very much, Charles. And thank you very much, everyone who has listened to this or who has joined us. In summary, what we are saying is that as a business, as a worker, as an academic, as a government, there's really no need predicting what the future will look like if we don't solve some of the current challenges that we face. Right now, it's going to be bleak if we continue at the current trajectory. And what we've concluded right here is that we all of us, as individuals and as a group, must find ways to begin to raise the next crop of young people, the future, to determine, to help them determine the right kind of skills they need to get and to help them get it. That the educational institution of the future must reflect these core challenges, being able to inspire and raise leaders. Leaders that have the skill sets and have the right attitude to be able to make a difference. Tarfa has mentioned how he wants to, get motivational messages out there in local languages to inspire young people to believe that they can. And Charles added the component of, working with them in groups, and that is amazing. That is a typical cluster development approach. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the end of today's session. Don't forget, in the next 25, 30 years, the world is going to be entirely different. If Africa doesn't get her acts right, we're going to be in trouble. And the savior is you and I. We are the cheetah generations. We are the ones that have this burden of making a difference for the future generation. And the choices we make today would, have really long-lasting effects. And we agree that the current crop of leadership that we have in Nigeria right now does not have the capacity to deliver what is expected. And you and I have that onus we get together, work together, and offer an alternative. Thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully, by this time next week, we'll bring another session of Emerging Managers Program. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tarfa. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. It was an amazing session. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.